So let's get started. Hi, this is John Firth. You're here joining me for the last installment of the Winter Spring series of Firth and Friends. And I'm thrilled to be here with my friend Alan Byrne and my new friend JoAnn Thomas. Both of them are seasoned HR experts, and who better to opine on ageism in the workplace but these two people, two experts. You'll notice the brand up in the upper right-hand corner has changed. It's no longer my corporate brand, John Frederick Firth and Vistage, who I run CEO groups with. It's your third act for professionals over 60. And this is, of course, an initiative that I'm spearheading. Alan's involved with it, and JoAnn hopefully will start getting involved. We put together groups of professionals who are over 60 trying to figure it out. Those of us who don't want to retire, who can't retire for whatever reason, but are faced with ageism in the workplace. And that's what today's topic is. So I'd like to kick it off and ask Alan to tell us who has been a head of HR, usually for private equity-owned firms. And he will tell us a little bit about his experience with it, because he confronted ageism just during COVID, really, in a much stronger way. I always felt that it was going to come. I don't know why, but since my 20s, that's why I chose to be a consultant, because I thought that's a good career for the time when I'm no longer going to be viable as a corporate employee. And that's kind of what happened. But Alan, it sort of crept up on you unexpectedly, right?
Yeah, so I've been, hi, John, and JoAnn, but I'm Alan Byrne. I'm a human resources consultant now. I've been in HR about 35 years and, worked my way up from, wherever I started many years ago. And I didn't realize as I was graduating through the role that everything was great and everything was fine. But once COVID hit and different things like that happened, suddenly I was out of work and I couldn't really look for a job. But there, I had to sit at home and wait till this world started to open up again. And then when it did, I started to make phone calls. I have an enormous amount of contacts. I have a large LinkedIn database. And as I was making contacts and people were getting me time to talk with recruiters, suddenly I was faced now with the 30-minute interview over Google or Zoom. And that person would be like, okay, we've got 30 minutes from time now. And they start asking me questions. And suddenly I was hearing comments like, so do you think you could still do that now? Do you think you could still keep up now? And I kept thinking, keep up. Okay. I'm thinking, but then at the same time, I was looking back at that person going, please tell me I won't be working for you because you're about 25 years old. Right. And that's just not something that I want to do. And in the end, what happened was I discovered that consulting was the best way for me to go. Mm-hmm. That people were much more interested in me bringing in my private equity background and working with groups of people and helping to put HR departments together. And that's where my professional maturity came into play. And one of the biggest things that I found for myself is that I could teach HR people of today's times, young, that it was okay to have a sense of humor in the workplace.
Excellent.
Yeah. The sense of humor with COVID had kind of been blown up and people were nervous. So that's kind of, for me, how I've gotten to where I am today.
Yeah, and I think that's, I wouldn't say a prototypical, everybody's story is different. But yeah, I think the way out of corporate and if you want to avoid the green pasture is through consulting arrangements. But JoAnn, you're doing the opposite. You're actually still trying to get a job, or maybe that interest is waning, as you just said to me before we started. Tell us a little bit about when you're actively trying to become an employee again over 60.
So I have spent most of my career in HR. Mm-hmm. And kind of like Alan, started at the bottom and worked my way up to being the VP of HR. I also was let go during the COVID years, and have been doing some consulting but at the same time, kind of realized that consulting also is a sales job. And
Mhm.
I did residential real estate sales for about 11 years, and just kind of reminds me of that. And I thought, I really would prefer to focus on my craft of being
Mhm.
a HR professional and
Mhm.
not have to be looking for new clients all the time. And most recently, I'm working with Lehigh Harrison as
Mhm.
a career transition coach. And what I'm seeing is a lot of middle-aged to older candidates that are looking for roles. And, my experience has been when I have gotten corporate interviews is typically the recruiters are quite young.
Right.
And, it's almost kind of like, I know I don't look like you, and I probably don't have a chance. And in most cases, that's true.
Mhm.
And, when I do apply for corporate positions, I do look at the leadership, I do look at the employee base. And if they look like a very young startup type company, and I'm thinking, I'm probably not, I probably could help them in a lot of ways because I have done startup. But at the same time, I'm thinking, nope, culturally, I probably do not fit with them. And so I tend to not apply for those types of positions.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting you bring up the topic of culture because I wanted to talk about organizational behaviors. And culture is really the beginning and end all of of organizational behavior because your code of values, your culture determines how things are going to get done. Most companies, and they even have it explicitly, if you look at code of values, it's usually number one is teamwork. Um, which implies subsuming the individual in favor of the team. Although some companies will then add on self-initiative, but the fact is that organizations live and breathe as a whole if everyone quasi toes the line. Now we know what that means. We know that sometimes you have to turn a blind eye to something that you don't agree with. Well, I think what happens in your 50s, especially, is you begin to realize that towing that line is no longer fulfilling, even if the paycheck is great. And you find it increasingly difficult because you're really experienced and you see things that you just cannot not say. And not saying that's a bad or good thing, but in my experience as a consultant, both internally and externally, you hire people who are experienced because they've got credibility, but they don't necessarily fit to the organization. So you hire them as change agents. And it's much better to be external to the organization coming inside than to be stuck internally trying to make change happen or trying to improve a system, because at some point the woodwork consumes you. It's like this creeping, crawling mass that suddenly envelops you, and then you disappear, and then you're no longer effective. But Alan, tell us a little bit about that because you've worked with consultants who have come in. You yourself have gone in as a change agent.
Yeah, I normally what I'm known for is to go in and kind of reshape, rebuild an HR organization that's gotten themselves into trouble, and the company's been acquired, and so
Mhm.
there's so much change going on, and they're in today's times now they're looking at the hiring numbers and they're starting to see that they can't afford the workforce that they've currently got in play. So now you've got the younger groups in the Googles, the Metas, that are now losing their positions and they're out in the market.
Right.
And so you see a lot of that advertising kind of all over the place. Um, and what I do is I go in and I work, just have them see some of the simplicity of the day to day of what their job is. And in human resources, a long time ago, somebody said your only job is to service your client and to take care of your client. That piece of paper may lay there all day. It'll eventually move. And so I've worked for some terrific companies where service came first. And so it just got built into your bloodstream. And so now when I go out there or I'm working with a group or I'm coaching somebody, I'm like, think about the person in front of you. What's the impact you're having? And, what do you want them to walk away with? And I
Right.
think that's a critical piece. But as I
Yeah.
said
Yeah.
before, John, and I know I'm probably talking too much, but this involvement of the larger companies laying off these 190,000 people. And then you have the group that was laid off before, that's the older group. And this culmination coming together. I don't know that anybody has a right answer to it, but I think the fact that we are talking about it and that we're bringing it out in the forefront will shake something up, because we're not the only ones talking about it.
Yeah.
No.
And by the way, we've talked about this. Ageism affects everyone. It's the only form of discrimination that every single person falls prey to, either because you're too young. And by the way, I think ageism almost is more of a problem internally than externally. We tend to be very sensitive human beings to these things, when maybe it's not ageism, it's something else that's inevitable. That's one of the things I'm trying to understand. I think it's inevitable that, given our, in my case at least, gray hairs, that you have a certain standing and credibility that CEOs want to use to make change happen. So is it really ageism, or is it something else, life cycles? But everybody, whether you're a straight white man or a lesbian black woman or Chinese or whatever, everybody is affected in some way. There's somebody saying, oh, you're too young, oh, you're too old. And some people are saying, oh, you're right. I remember exactly the point when I knew I was right at the right age for a whole bunch of roles. It was about 37, 38, and that lasted for about 10 years. And I felt like I could walk into any situation, I'd be taken seriously. But JoAnn, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Experience in what way?
Experience in terms of, as an HR professional, let's say that, when you were sitting there and you were part of the team that had to evaluate an organization, who was going to get hired, who's not. Give us a little of the inside view of ageism from a corporate's point of view. And is it really happening in corporate? Or
I might be not the norm, because I remember when I was in my 20s and I was, a young recruiter, and we were hiring for kind of manufacturing positions. And I ended up hiring this older gentleman who was a former postal worker. And when I went to file his resume in, the file that we kept all the resumes, I found his resume again. I pulled it out, and my probably 40-year-old manager wrote "too old" on the resume.
Oh,
and I kind of laughed to myself, and I thought, oops, well, I hired him, and he turned out to be a good employee. And I did at some point ask my manager, I don't know if I admitted this particular situation, and it was the director from the CFO saying he didn't want to hire older workers. And in hindsight, I think these were 40-year-old people.
Huh. And why do you think that was? What do you think was going on inside their heads? Was it because I can't mold them and they're too expensive, or they're too expensive, or he was threatened somehow?
Oh, I think probably back then it might have been they might impact our benefits. They might use our benefits more versus younger people. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, I'm kind of curious where he ended up. Did he ever face? And he was actually somebody at 40 who looked older. He had the gray hair, he had receding hairline, he wasn't the picture of health. And he looked like
I wonder if that's what the person very clumsily was expressing, is I don't know if he's really as performance oriented as a younger person. Because when you're starting out, and most of us don't have a lot of money when we're in our 20s, and we get highly motivated to start climbing the corporate ladder if we choose that route. And a lot of times it's just simply paying the bills that'll keep us going. And the fact that we'll get promotions at key times, and if we're good, it'll keep going. But that's interesting that somebody will just look at a person or make a decision based on their looks. Do you think that's what happened? He just looked and said he was just not, I can't see the performance there?
I think it was based on a resume, but
I was.
For this one individual, but he must have had some, thought process that we weren't supposed to hire older people.
Mm-hmm. Alan, how is that covered by employment law, that sort of thing? Did he just break the law by saying too old on writing it on a resume?
Well, that was in class 1A when way back when it's like, don't write any comments on a resume at all.
Right.
Except the fact of the matter is now most of them are electronic. So as you said earlier about talking about the electronic age, but I wanted to make a point from the younger side, this new group, John, that we're starting of the over 60s. And there's another gentleman in the group who's not over 60, he's younger. And he was listening to us older guys talk a couple of weeks ago. And he was told that he didn't have to stay on the call anymore because we were going to talk about other things. And he said, do you mind if I stay on the call? Because he said, I get so inspired listening to you guys talk about the wealth of experience that you have and what you bring to the party, and that you bring it with such kindness and joy. And I kept thinking, oh, wow, I guess we do. So I think I wanted to make that point.
I think there is very much a role for us, and it is more of a coaching, mentoring role. But we have a comment from Michelle Bushneff. I'll summarize it. That we have to, as older professionals, be open to working with and for young leaders. And she's glad that we mentioned that. Some of the most blatant ageism she has faced has been from leaders in my age bracket. I'm assuming that means our age bracket. Let's talk about then the other form of ageism, which is you're too young to be doing this, or you have to show some gray hair, or you have to show some war wounds before I can take you seriously. JoAnn, I see you're nodding your head. You probably have something to say about that.
Well, when I was in real estate, we talked about getting your nose bloodied. As far as as part of sales experience, you got to go through the hard knocks in order to, gain that experience. And I think we all learn from our mistakes and our failures, and that's how we grow if we're allowed to have mistakes. But as a younger person, I've definitely felt that in my younger years as an HR person. When you're young, we're trying to prove ourselves. We want to work hard and show that we are a good employee, that we're promotable. And probably my experience, back in the 80s and 90s, probably isn't that much different than what's happening to people today. Is that in some companies, because workers don't leave, there's, specific people enjoy their job so much that, there isn't that, mid to senior level attrition that allows the younger worker to move up.
Right.
And, that happened to me. And so I ended up.
That happened to me too, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Yeah. And every couple of years, I was job hunting to get that next increase in pay, next increase in experience. And I think that's, people talk about, younger people job hunting. I thought, well, that hasn't changed. We're all striving. We all want to do better in our lives. And sometimes you do have to leave companies because those opportunities aren't there.
No, thank God for executive recruiters. All I can say is I've been saved. My career has been saved by one or two of them. And as a matter of fact, the other member of this group, Your Third Act group that Alan and I are referring to, he's an executive recruiter. And thank God they exist, because that's sort of the valve that you can turn on if you have experience in what have you, but you're not finished and the organization you're at has a glass ceiling. That happened to me at Accenture. They happened to have a lot of new partners, a lot of new project managers, but turning project managers into partner was difficult because there was a limited number of partnerships that at that point Accenture had open. So you had thousands of project managers waiting to get promoted, taking the courses, getting the experience, and not getting promoted because you had maybe 100 partnerships open. So a lot of us left Accenture. There was big bloodletting because that's, glass ceilings there, and we saw it. And it was just because of the position we were at that point in our career.
So as a white male, you have faced a glass ceiling?
Glass ceiling in the sense that I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. You're right about, it's interesting you say that as a white male, now a white gay male. So I am part, like Alan, I'm part of a minority already. I unfortunately come across, that's it. So I don't, a lot of people don't think of me as being gay. I mean, they don't, it's not like they're surprised when they find out. But, you know, I live in Brooklyn, which is sort of, I say, the anti-discrimination. I'm not Black or Latino or a woman, and I come across as the white establishment male. And you'd be surprised, actually, some of the things that happen to me because of that, like coffee being thrown at me in the subway by a colored person. I don't know what was going on. I was wearing my Wall Street outfit, my suit, and I don't know, it was pissed off or somebody threw his coffee at me. So you do get that too. But I think white men are, in fact, I think that's a lot of what's happening with our MAGA people, is suddenly white people are feeling major, major discrimination. But again, ageism affects everyone. At some point, you're just no longer fit. White men can hold on. We see Rupert Murdoch, who should have let go years ago. He's about to destroy his entire company. He should have let go. Sumner Redstone should have let go. So there is a natural biological thing that happens, and that happens to white men just as it does to Black women, to Chinese women. You know, we all age. There is a couple of interesting facts, though, that I want to throw out there. One is, and I've showed you this, so I'm not going to pose the question, is studies have shown that as we get older, we get more productive, not less. So 50, we're more productive than we were in our 40s and 30s. 60, we're even more productive. And we hit our productivity height in our 70s. And people don't really realize that. And I know for myself, part of the reason why is I have more energy because I don't really give a damn anymore about having to worry. I've worried so much during my corporate world. And when you're not worrying and you're just out there doing your thing and getting paid for it, suddenly all that energy you expelled is no longer necessary. I think that's one reason. But Alan and JoAnn, I'd like to ask you guys, how are you seeing your productivity change as we get older? Would you agree with this statement?
First off, I'd like to thank you for outing me after 25 years. It's been so long since I've heard this. It's like I had to remind myself that I was gay. I went, oh yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So,
the world has changed very positively for us. Yes.
So anyways, but no, I think that productivity is higher in the older person because they're just thrilled to be working and they're thrilled to be back in the mix of people and they get involved and they're like doing different projects and get, learning different things. I think older people today are more interested in the new technologies and that they want to learn more. I drive people crazy. I'm like, what are you doing? How are you doing that? Show me, and so, yeah, I mean, that's what I think. So JoAnn, I don't know about yourself. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. What's your experience been?
Well, I also have a statistic too that I was just reading today that there is scientific evidence that our mental horsepower declines after age 30,
Okay.
but knowledge and expertise, the main predictors of job performance, continues beyond the age of 80.
Yes.
And when it comes to learning, there is no age limit. I think the biggest driver is your desire to continue to learn. And I think people who aren't engaged in something or a purpose or something that challenges their mind, learning a new language, I'm learning Procreate, new artist software. If you are constantly learning and keeping your mind active, in addition to keeping up with HR laws and trends and things like that, I mean, it truly does keep you young, because you're up to date on what is going on in the world. I read the news around the world every morning and fully informed, and that that keeps me I guess in touch with what's going on with the world.
I'm definitely more informed about the world now than I was even 10 years ago. Much more informed. I think there's in corporate life. So what you're pointing to is one of my, it's more than a belief. It's really a realism, is people get hired when they're young because they've got lots of energy. And you give them tasks that require a lot of energy. Like in real estate cold calling. What do? You give the 22-year-old the cold calling because one, everybody hates it and they don't know that they're going to hate it until they do it. Exactly. But it develops certain skills, but it requires a lot of energy. I mean, constantly be doing this and being on top of your form. That energy slowly gives way to wisdom, experience, knowledge, and so forth. So that with less energy, we're able to do a lot more because we can tell the difference between quality, important, value-added work and dumbass stuff that every corporation has to do that slowly but surely computers are taking over. And that is, of course, in theory, what would make our value go up. But Alan, I'd like to ask you about technology. How do you feel in a world that's becoming increasingly technological? You say that you're interested and we think we're learning, but I find there are times with my younger clients that I'm all thumbs when it comes to technology, and I'm always embarrassed.
I came into the technology world out of banking. In banking, they didn't have any computers. And funny enough, Michelle Bushneff, who's on this call today, Michelle was with the company that I went to work for at Broderbund. And so suddenly I had to start using a computer, which today it's like I don't know how to operate without one. And I've had to learn all kinds of different softwares, being able to develop anything from Excel presentations to PowerPoint to just newer things that are coming out. And I think it's absolutely necessary. And that even people that are sitting at home right now looking for jobs, and they should get online and check out some new softwares, because you can usually get free copies for a while, and and just be prepared for what may be next for you, because you don't know what that is. And I don't think anybody can predict what that is.
Well, in Silicon Valley, they call it's sort of like fashion. It's somebody somewhere gets this idea and it takes root for whatever reason. It's like Devil Wears Prada, if you remember that. That's the part when she's talking about her, I forget what color sweater, and she said, you don't know this, but 40,000 people determined that that's the color you'll be wearing at this spring. It's sort of like somewhere in Silicon Valley, the decision's made that this is going to be the next big thing. What I find difficult is when I'm under stress. Now today, preparing for this, we had no technological glitches, but I've had some major technological glitches, and at some point I wig out. It triggers me really badly. JoAnn, what's been your experience in terms of having to suddenly be functional with some technology that may not go so well, or where you're the only one who's been asked to deal with it, and you find yourself hamstrung? Have you ever found that? And some of your younger colleagues are telling you what to do?
Well, so when I was in HR, and then I took a side detour into selling residential real estate with my husband at the time. And so I had the corporate technology experience. And when I went into real estate, nobody knew anything about computers, and I had the most knowledge. And I would say during that 11 years that I was selling real estate, my technology skills went down the drain. Basically stopped because I wasn't getting that stimulus that a corporation provides. And then, going back into the corporate world, there's, so many more opportunities. They're trying new softwares and things like that. And I worked with I accepted a job at a company, and it didn't work out. But when I started at that company, all I could think of, and I had already been, a VP of HR and using lots of different softwares, but starting in a new company with their new softwares, all I could think of was there's too many platforms, there's too many logins, there's too many ways to communicate. And that part, I think, was frustrating to me until you kind of get into the groove and you see, and some of this information is old. So, you're trying to weed through what's new and relevant. But if you think about, and I'm probably going to miss a lot of communication tools, but I mean, you have your cell phone, you have your email, you have Slack, you have Teams, then you have your internet and blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like there isn't one point of communication that you can reference. It's kind of like, where did I see that message or that information somebody shared with me? And that is probably the one thing that I have found to be challenging. But again, once you understand how the corporation works and, they're going to share certain information in teams, that then that's where you go to find that information.
It's interesting you say that, and this may not be exactly what you meant, but what takes me aback and says you are getting older is I have 3 browsers. Not all of them work as well as the other one for certain sites and so forth. And when I'm on a call with a client and I'm suddenly trying to get the Zoom to work and I'm on the wrong browser and so forth, I just get totally flustered. And it actually exhausts me. Nothing exhausts me more than to sit with 3 browsers open, trying to remember how each one of them works, what I'm trying to find. Whereas younger people, it's like typing. They just type in, they've got all the technology and they know where to go, and it's so fast. I am slowing down when it comes to just using technology. I'm getting more and more frustrated because it's gotten so complex. That's, I'd say, the one time when I really feel like I'm getting old is when I'm trying to do something with technology and it's just gotten overcomplicated.
Well, the other thing that's missing, the other missing link too, is you don't have an IT department, consultant. And that would be your calling up and, and they could probably answer a couple of quick questions about each of the browsers and you would be good to go, but you don't have that resource.
Right, 100%. That's one of the biggest issues for being independent. Unless you're willing to pay for a good IT desk, and that can cost anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a month, depending on how much you need them and what they do for you.
So, are we saying that the younger generation is more apt to just pick it up quicker in the workforce? And
well, they grew up with it. So for them, it's more hardwired into their brain. Right. It's like when I have an HP calculator. When we were at that age in our 20s and 30s when the calculators started to become technology everybody used, we no longer had to use slide rules. But a lot of old people didn't know how to do the calculator. They were so used to using other methodologies that it was an abacus. You go into Chinese stores in Chinatown or in New York, everybody used the abacus, even when there were calculators available. So we grew up with TV, with calculators. We did not grow up with the internet and with digital technology. And I find, my nieces and nephews, they're just like, they pick anything up and within a second or two, they've sort of got it and they figured it all out. I just don't think our brains were trained that way, literally.
Well, if you think about when we grew up with technology, because we did too, but right. The beginning of our education was, I think mine was in college. And, you had to put a floppy in and another floppy in for computer work. And we have gone through, good God, DOS. And now everything is Windows. And I think there are just similar things that work the same way across multiple platforms. And it's just a matter of learning those things. The other thing was a friend of mine bought a PC magazine, Microsoft, and I was reading through it and it had all these little tips and tricks and, how to, use the software better. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a place that you can get quick pieces of information. This was probably before the whole Google thing. Mm-hmm. And you could learn more about the behind the scenes type of things that just opening up a software aren't evident.
Right. What about you, Alan? By the way, there's a comment from Alan Wasserman: digital pioneer versus a digital native. That's a good way of looking at it. Or cassettes. We all grew up in the world of cassettes, which on one hand I miss terribly because I used to be a composer and all my stuff is on cassettes and I've never tried to turn it digitally. But cassettes, remember how they sometimes get caught by the machine and suddenly you get this unraveling of the cassette?
That's never happened.
Right, exactly. Compact discs eliminated that problem. Yeah, actually, Alan, I'd love to know your thoughts. If we think of us as digital pioneers, because that's what we were, and digital natives. Is that causing any headaches for you, where you find you're just not as fast as the younger people?
Well, I honestly have always been technically challenged. So
Okay.
but what I am very good at is resourcing how I'm going to solve my issue. And so I'm able to find people, or I have an individual, since I work out of my house, that I call him, and he can get online and he can take me through. And he knows that the first thing is not to fix it, but it's almost like I'm in class. So I want you to show me. I want to see what you're doing, and then I want to do it so that I don't have to call you as much.
Right. Yeah. No. And honestly, you're pointing to, I think, the number one issue, which is how do we add value at different stages in our life? I doubt anybody's going to hire us because we're technologically savvy. They're going to hire us because what's up here, which I've been fascinated. I've been doing a lot of YouTube. It's my favorite place to go now because of all the videos I've got about this. And it is a fact that our brains are incredibly, it's not very well understood. But the fact is, I can talk better, I can think better, I can communicate much better than when I was in my 20s and 30s because I know a lot more. I can read people better. I have much better empathy. I've got the war wounds. And I love helping young people think through that and learn it. But that doesn't require technology. If anybody thinks that technology, I'll give you one example really quickly. There's a debate on a YouTube video about what is consciousness? And consciousness, as we understand it, is a subjective experience of the world. And that's a pretty unique thing, at least in this country, in this planet, and probably the universe, is that we have this ability to take things subjective and know that we are who we are. But it's all biologically based. It's all organic. Kurzweil, the guy who started speech recognition, says he believes in 10 years' time, they're actually going to be able to go beyond biological consciousness and that machines will have consciousness. Now, I find that really hard to believe. But quite honestly, what we're adding is not technology because the technology has its limits. We have that inexplicable understanding that only a human brain, when it's really well trained and experienced, can bring to the table. I don't know if you would agree or not.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree. I mean, I think that there's many people out there that probably have different opinions, and of course, love to hear them. But I don't know, JoAnn, what do you think?
I think I'm in agreement too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, it's like I have never been hired for a job where somebody sat me down and tested my technology skills, because that's not why I'm there. They've brought me in because there's more of the people talent that I have with people, and that's what they want me for. And so, so therefore I kind of feel like, yeah, I can contribute to the conversation here, but it's really like, if you want to align a team, if you want to, get people working together more effectively, if you want to build productive, then I'm your guy. And there's all kinds of technology, but I'm hiring the people that are coming in to do those things and getting them to work.
Right.
And having them show me what they're doing.
I did my last LinkedIn Live last week was about the concept of agile software development, and how you apply that to organizations. And he says very pointedly, technology is just a tool. It doesn't live beyond just being a tool. It is a facilitator of a tool. And and for young people, sometimes it overwhelms them and they think it's all about the tool. It is just a tool. What you really need are the brains behind it to know not only how you use the tool, but what is it you're trying to achieve. And I think a lot of young people get lost in that. We have one final comment, and I think we'll say goodbye. A LinkedIn user says, people and technology aren't mutually exclusive skills, though. I agree. It also depends on the role. If you're going to go into the IT department of a company, you better damn well know your technology. HR is probably on the other extreme, where it is, if you don't have empathy, you don't understand human beings, you don't understand the quirks of being human, you can be technologically challenged and you'll still be highly effective. And every function in an organization has a slightly different need for technology, and that determines how skilled you should be. But yes, people and technology aren't mutually exclusive. Certainly not in the corporate world.
My stint at that one company, they had such a laborious process because they didn't have the right software. They basically had a very low level payroll system, and having experienced the benefits of a really good HRIS system, it was so frustrating because there were so many things that were manual that didn't have to happen.
Yeah.
And duplication of work. And, I'm actually an advocate for technology, and it needs to be good technology, well researched, because I think that's part of the problem. We buy things that we don't fully understand their capabilities. Right. And then only after that's been installed, we find their shortcomings.
Right, exactly.
But technology, can streamline HR processes. And, not that I'm ever trying to eliminate a job position, but, eliminate busy work that doesn't need to happen. And then maybe that person, or there is a person in your department that can then focus on cultural add type of activities that would benefit the company more than just pushing paper.
Yeah, I agree. And our LinkedIn user makes another comment that he or she would propose that HR has a lot of tech tools and IT has a lot of people communication requirements. So that distinction I made isn't trying to. In fact, the biggest issue people have with IT departments is their inability to communicate properly with people who don't live in their world, to translate technical terms into things that people, that's been a big thing of mine with my clients, is sometimes they have technical people who can't express it in a way that everybody else can understand. But likewise, I think HR, there's a lot of tech in HR that, and that because you were head of operations, that without that, HR would not be so effective.
Exactly.
And it's supposed to happen. Great. Well, thank you, guys. There's still lots of stuff we could talk about. We didn't even talk about government and certain employment. We touched on it. But this has been fascinating. Again, I've started this group. Alan is one of the founding members, called Your Third Act. Please feel free to get in touch with me. Many of you will start hearing from me about getting to explore this. It is not exclusively for people over 60, although people who are over 60 and dealing with what we've talked about will find a home there. And it's a group for support, for networking, for ideas, and just to let your hair down, talk to people who are going through the same things.
Yeah. And John, people's emails for JoAnn and myself are there too.
Yes.
They want to connect up with us or on our LinkedIn, and more than happy to talk with anybody. And I thank some of my old friends from the past to joining today.
Which is awesome. I think, Alan, you've got a huge following.
From smile in my heart, that's for sure.
Yeah, you have a great following. Every time we do a LinkedIn, there's all these people I don't know, and they're all friends of yours. So that's also a good thing, is we've built our networks. Don't forget, older people come with big networks that can be invaluable to an organization or to a client. So thank you, JoAnn. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, John.
We'll pick up this topic again, and I'll see you later today for our group, Alan.
Okay. Thanks for joining.
Right. Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.